Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai, Perek Hey, Halacha Daled, and Halacha Hey. We are learning today Daf Mem Vav. We're going to begin on Daf Mem Hey Amid Beis, all the way at the end of the Amid by the new Mishnah Halacha Daled, as we already spoke out in the introduction in yesterday's share, when we began to speak about Halacha Daled, that we will be introduced to a palter. And I know that a palter, by Pei Lamed Tes Reish, is many times used and interpreted as a baker, right? Pas Yisrael, pas palter, but actually that's not accurate. Accurately, nachtoim is a baker, and a palter is the middleman, the one who buys large quantities from a baker, but he is the one that sells it in the market one at a time. In other words, a baker today, a bakery, at least here in LA, the ones that I know of, they bake it and they sell it and they sell it. And you have, for example, Schwartz Bakery, right? So they bake for many vendors, but they also have an outlet. Many bakeries, they bake it and they sell it. But it's two different businesses. Nachtoim is the baker. Palten is the person who buys, not a retailer. They buy wholesale from the baker to sell one at a time. And as we'll see, a manpoil or a manpoil, which will be a certain type of palter, unlike the palter, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, the palter is someone who buys from one baker. The manpoil is someone who buys from different bakers. And as that will make all of the difference in the context of our sugya. What's our sugya? Again, being that there's a rule that ain and we said already that by Demai, we don't view Demai as the same level of chiyuv, even though it is a chiyuv midrabanan, but there is still some sort of doubt imbued and part of the Zayda midrabanan. And therefore, when a person buys Demai from two different Amei Ha'aretz, they may not be Toidim Uma'ased from one purchase on the other purchase. And now, that was the topic we had until Halacha Daled. What should we do if I buy from the Nachtoim? Right? Machlekes, let's go to Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Meir was the lenient one. Rav Meir holds that even if I bought yesterday bread and today bread, even if the bread comes in one mold and I bought bread in another mold, we don't presume that the raw material was bought by the Nachtoim from different suppliers. We don't say that Rav Meir was lenient, and therefore you could be Toidim Ma'asir from hot on cold, cold on hot, this form on that form, and Rabbi Yehuda Aser. And we don't need the Rav Shimon. In our Mishnah, we're going to flip. We're going to have a machlokes regarding the palter between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir. The one that's machmed will be mekel. The mekel will be machmed, as we will elaborate when we learn it inside. And we will have, as the Mishnah introduces the manpoil, which is someone who buys it, l'kula alma, from different vendors, which would mean that if I buy bread from a manpoil, I can't even be toidim ma'ased from one bread on the other. Because could be one bread that I bought through the manpoil came from baker A, the other bread came from baker B. We're speaking all about the Amei Ha'aretz. Now, what happens if you know that in this town there is one manpoil, you don't know who that person is. Most people that are selling in the market are palters. So this is really a shasugya. So how are you to determine, is there a halachic way for you to determine, for you to say halachically, my bread I bought from the palter, and therefore if I bought 2 loaves of bread, I could be toidim ma'asim from one on the other. That will be so we're going to have, sfekes, we're going to have chazakes, we're going to have weak proofs, we're going to have perhaps kol kavua kamechzal mechza, we're going to have all of these rules being attempted to be used or to be used, again, when it comes to determine if you don't know who the manpoil is. That's going to be more or less the sugya of halacha dalet. And halacha hey, that begins on daf mem vav amud beis, will speak about completely different situations. We're speaking about the same underlying issue, where one acquires or received a produce, any produce, from different people. Just as an example, if you have an ani that Nebuch has to go knocking on doors, and different balabatim, if they give, every balabas gives the ani another loaf of bread. By the way, so the question is, if the ani is a chavir, he has now at the end of the day, he has in his basket that he went collecting food, he has a couple of loaves of bread. Or if the ani sells to other people, sometimes the ani collected more than he needed, and he needs money to buy, I don't know, to buy whatever, to buy water. He'll sell the bread, and he'll buy water. Same thing. What are we going to do when it comes to being toidim or ma'asad from one bread on the other? Now you're going to say, of course, you can do from one on the other. I know that. The chiddush of the Mishnah will be is that there are certain items, as we will see, that ani would receive, and he would then mix them together. He would do belila. If we were to say that when a person does belila, when there is intermingling, one can do so perfectly. Listen to this logic. So you can intermingle products that came from different sources, that really each product needed to be tied, damai, by itself. But if you intermingled it, if we're going to say that belila could be done perfectly, halachically, now that they are all intermingled, I can take off from this new interminglings, let's say trumas meiser, and I can say that I took off from each one exactly what it needed. That's going to be the big chiddush that we're going to have in halacha. Hey, we're going to speak about this other category that we spoke earlier on in the Masechta of a sitoim, of a wholesaler. A wholesaler is not only someone that buys produce from different vendors, not only that, but the wholesaler doesn't even sell it retail, unlike the palter that sells it in the market. The sitoim sells it in large quantities, and we're going to see concerning the sitoim that even though the am haaretz doesn't have credibility, not Neman, concerning whether he was toidim or ma'asad everything or not, we don't believe what he said. His lack of ne'emanus is only regarding trumas u'maisas, which was something that he in his personal life was lax in. So if I am not meticulous, for me, then only in that area am I not trustworthy to testify or to tell you what I did regarding you. However, in all other areas, the am haaretz is fully neman, and that will be very relevant that we do give him a lot of nemanus when it comes to the sitoin, as we will see when we learn this inside. All the way in bottom of the Amid, halacha daled. Yes.
How do you mix bread? How do you intermingle bread?
It won't be bread. It won't be bread, Kevin. You'll see. It will be dried figs. It will be. We'll see. Certain products, not bread. Very good. It's mamash amazing. Okay, Zot the Mishnah. Halakech men ha-palter. Look inside the Marafulda. Palter, who halakeyach, is the one who buys min hanachtoimen. He buys from bakers, but he buys large quantities. Kikoris harbe. He buys them bebas achas. Umoichrem achakach beshuch echad. But he's not a wholesaler. The point is, he's not a baker. So here again, the question is: does a palter buy from one source? Does the palter buy from different sources? Look inside the Rashirilio also, on the left side. Oh no, you know, Mishmas Nisan. Palter and why is it called a palter? Miloshoin platia. Platia is a plaza. Plaza is like the open market. He sells it. They call him the palter because he's standing in the palter. He's standing in the plaza. He's standing in the platia, selling to individuals. You know, they're saying the same thing. He's just explaining the word palter. So now, here, I just want to also make it clear that since the Marafulda says explicitly, I understand that's what the Rashi really was trying to say. He's selling the Midah Daka, which means that without even having to repeat it, but we kept on quoting it a few times already in Daf Chafal of the Machlekes, Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Elazar. Here, for sure, the palter is an Amaretz, for sure. Because since he's selling it in small quantities, if the palter would have been a chaver and Midah Daka, he has to, the seller should have separated everything. Problem is that the palter is an Amaretz. And now you bought it from the palter. So says the Mishnah. Here again, we're going to go with the Seder of Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda. But you'll see, like I mentioned, here Rav Meir is machmer. In Mishnah Halacha Gimel, Rav Meir was the maker. He says you could separate hot, cold, hot. You could separate from one mold on the other. You could. Because Anachtoim, Rav Meir holds then These things are l'choura. It's conforming the time and the place. That's Rav Meir. Here we say ma'ased mikol tufus utufus. You cannot separate. If I bought from the paltet in the market and I got 2 loaves of bread, and each one was made in a different mold. If it was made in a different mold, Rav Meir holds that a paltet buys from different nachtoimim. That's it. Or look inside the top maraful. Ma'aser we call the fus of the fus. The sfirulei that Rav Meir paltet mitrei utelasa nachtoimim zavin. A paltet will buy from different suppliers, different bakers, but not always. So how can we independently determine whether what you bought today from the paltet came from one vendor or not? It has to do with the tfus. Again, the Mishnah uses the test, the Mara uses the Dalit. Keep your finger on Rabbi Yehuda, keep the finger in the Mara folder, because there's no new Divrei Hamaskal. Now back in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, no, me'echad ala koil. Even if they came from different molds, don't forget, guys, Rabbi Yehuda will hold that if you bought it today and you bought it yesterday, Rabbi Yehuda will hold, even if you bought it from the same paltet. And we're saying, Rabbi Yehuda, that the paltet sticks to one vendor, to one baker, but the baker himself, today and yesterday, the baker, Rabbi Yehuda, bought it from different suppliers of the wheat. So what Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir are speaking about in this Mishnah is you bought it today, but you bought more than 1 loaf of bread. If your breads are made in the same mold, Bein Rav Meir, Bein Rabbi Yehuda, you are able to separate the demai separations. But if you bought today 2 loaves or more, and each one is made in a different mold, here Rav Meir holds that since palters buy from different bakers, we're going to use the different mold as a halachic indication that each bread that you bought came from a different baker. And every baker buys from their own suppliers. Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, here's lenient. Look inside the Maraful, the 3rd line from the top. Rabbi Yehuda Savad, that as a rule, there are exceptions, as we'll see in a moment. Palter, mechad, nachlim zav. This palter, retailer, right, he buys and he sells in the market. He buys it generally from one supplier. Even though the breads that you bought are different, shaped different, doesn't matter. Still, they came from the same baker. He emphasizes, if you bought all yesterday, or if you bought all from today, means you bought hot, you bought cold. If they are all in the same category, you're making it clear, just so important. Now, don't forget what Rabbi Yehuda said yesterday. Don't forget what Rabbi Yehuda said in Halacha Gimel. So that's why his leniency is only when you bought it on the same day. Okay. Now, says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, that if you, in the market, you private citizen, balabas, if you buy it from the manpoil, what's the manpoil or the manpoil marafuda? Like a palter, it's like a palter, but the manpoil buys it from different bakers. That's why we're giving him another name. Manpoil koina mi palterin harbe umoicher lachedem. It's common that he buys it from many suppliers. By the way, even if they have the same form, we don't know. A manpol, we know, is someone doesn't care from whom he gets it. There's no quality control. He just buys whatever he can get and he sells it. A manpoil is like someone who has a duty-free perfumery. You understand? You buy the gray market. You buy wherever the batch is cheaper. Unlike what I don't even know, the white market. If that's what it's called. Stick to a supplier. Okay.
Question, sorry. Basic question. Tiding them separately or together, where did that come from? The fact that you can or you can't, I forgot. I'm sorry.
No, so since when I buy Demai from 2 different Amei Haaretz, and I have to take off 1%, and let's say I have 2 loaves of bread that have exactly the same weight, 1% would mean an ounce, would mean right. Whatever. I can't take off 2 ounces from one for both breads. I'm giving a bad example because an ounce is a liquid measure, but a weight measure, a gram. Okay. Says the Gemara, guys, Gemara, for those who just joined us, on Daf Memvav Amud Aleph.
Ounce works too for, there's fluid ounces and then there's regular ounces. Which
Thank
also...
you, Danish. Okay. That's great. That's correct. That's what we say, Shiyurim by Yom Kippur. Ounce. We use the ounce. Thank you. Rav Meir Omer, Nachtoim Oise Defus Echad. Why does Rav Meir say that you are Ma'aseh Mikol Tufus V'Tufus? It's not only because a palter buys from different Nachtoimim, but you have to add, Rav Meir holds that every baker uses one mold. Now, when we say one mold, it doesn't mean that a baker mamish only has one mold. What did we learn yesterday? You have to put it together with the Mishnah Halacha Gimel. Rav Meir says you can be trading a ma'aser from one mold on the other. It means that there's a unique type of mold. The bakers made their molds. So even if one baker has 5 types, all 5 will be unique. That's the meaning. Every baker has his own unique mold. Upalter mishtamish become a nachtoimin. So when you put these 2 things together, if you have different types of molds, compiled with the fact that a palter will have various suppliers, and every baker has a certain type, and here you're finding different types, that's why Rav Meir holds that they came from different suppliers, which means they came from different amei haaretz. So therefore, every tufus has to be tied by itself. Okay, what is the Gemara adding in between the lines? What would happen? I mean, even though the Mishnah says it also, even let Rav Meir that a palter buys bread from different bakers. If I go to a palter in the plaza and I buy 5 loaves of bread and they all look alike, even Rav Meir holds I could be ma'aser me'echad ala koil. Just because the palter buys his bread from different suppliers, but what I bought, if they look alike, they came from one nachtom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, number 1, nachtom oisa kamet fusim. Number 1, it's not true. We don't say that every type of mold is unique to each baker. Sometimes one baker will build molds and he'll sell some of it to others. So every baker, to begin with, could have different types of molds, compounded with, together with the fact that, as a rule, with exceptions, as we'll see in a line, that opalter mishtamish benachtem echad. So since, as a rule, a palter tries to stick with one supplier, together with the fact that even though they have different forms, Rabbi Yehuda, it's not so uncommon for a baker to have completely different style forms. So therefore, even when you buy different shape molded breads, me'echad al hakoil. Very good. And that, by the way, this is so aligned with what we learned yesterday at the end of the whole Gemara when we were trying to figure out what is the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. The conclusion that we had is that Rabbi Yehuda, the shape of the mold is not a determinant. Gavaldik. It's mamash fits. It's Rabbi Yehuda. Now says the Gemara, what's a monpoil? So Devei Rabbi Yana Yamrei. And here we go. So we already said, it's going to get fun now, that a monpoil is someone that even Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a palter, as a rule, attempts to buy from one supplier, a monpoil had no such rule. If you know who the monpoil is, if you know who the palter is, Rabbi Yehuda, it's very clear. You buy anything from a palter, I don't care, you bought 1, you bought 20, you bought it from a monpoil, then you have to give it mikol echad ve'echad. Mikol echad ve'echad means even if they have the same form, doesn't mean anything. When you know someone buys from different suppliers, every bread stands by itself. But Devei Rabbi Yana is already going to dive into the following scenario. If in the city there are 9 paltarim, there are 9 palter people, that's how they make their living, and in the same city or village, you have 10 nachtoimen. A nachtoim won't be in business if no one buys from him. Think about it. Before we read inside the solution, let's appreciate the problem. Guys, if you have 9 paltarim, and you have 10 bakers, and they're still in business, that means these bakers, these nachtoimen, are selling it to someone. It must be that minimally one paltet is buying from two sources. You get what I'm saying? Because if every paltet only buys from one nachtoim to the extreme, which is not true, then 9 paltotin would keep 9 nachtoimin in business. So clearly, in such a setting, at least one is buying from more than one nachtoim, even like Rabbi Yehuda.
Then he'll be a manpol.
That's right. Then he'll be a manpol. Then we'll call him a manpol. So even though he doesn't go with the title manpol, we know he's a manpol. Now, there's so many options. We can say that none of these paltaran are buying from only one. We can go to the extreme. Or we can say that since they use the name palted, obviously, minimally, one has to be a manpoil. So let's only say one is a manpoil. Let's begin with that. And that's what we say. That's what we say. Now, we don't yet know who is who. We'll get to there in a moment. So what we say is that tumnaya, that's from 8. Min the tumnaya, since the palted, this is all Rabbi Yehuda. Since Rabbi Yehuda, a palted is used, and they're calling themselves palters because they generally buy from one. So 8 buy from 8. And from the 9 paltadin, only one is a manpoil. Only chad, that's what we say, min the trei. Now, let's read the Marafulda. It's very important. We'll read it's a small daf. Let's read the whole Marafulda. Timnaya min the Timnaya, guys, it's the last couple of lines in the narrow lines. Shmoyne paltadin, koine mishmoyne nachtoimin. That's what we say. The yishor paltad echad. Shekoine min shnei nachtoimin. And we say the minimum that we have to. That one, which is the 9th paltad, taka is not a paltad, right? Kaven, he's a manpoil. Imkain, al karchach, from that one, ma'asim mikol defus la'atzmei. From that one. Ma'asim mikol defus la'atzmei. That's another chiddush. But from the same defus, you can still separate one or the other. Sharei, who kana b'shnei nachtoimin. Vachi, hazeh hu an manpoil, the masnisim. Shekona laha pasheloim b'shnei nachtoimin. Oh. So now, let's go to the following. V'i lekekan elotisha nachtoimim. Lo yhoy moide Rabbi Yehuda. Kiven shekol paltat enu koine elmanachtem echad. The yesh l'zet fusam harbe. The ein kan manpol klal. So here we go. Okay, but what happens? We don't know who is who, but one of these 9 paltarin, they have breads that have different forms. So even though we said, well, Rabbi Yehuda, the forms by themselves don't indicate different suppliers, that's when you know the person is a paltar. But if you don't know, we use the different forms as a raya. 8 of them have the same form. Then one of the paltarim have different forms. Minimally, one is buying from different suppliers. So I'm going to say now that the one that has different forms, he's the one that's the manpoil. And when I buy from him, not every bread, but breads from different forms from this guy is what I have to be ma'asir, each one on their own. And that's exactly what Rabbi Yoina is saying. So Rabbi Yoina, like we just mentioned, in such a scenario, when one of these 9 have breads that they're selling, but they are in different molds, even though normally we say that a palter only buys from one source, but we know that in this city, one of these 9 paltarim are buying from 2 sources. One of the 9 are manpoils. So the one that's selling today from 2 molds, this is beautiful. That's the whole kiddush over here. In other words, I don't know which one is buying from many. So if 8 of them all are selling breads from one mold, and one of the 9 paltarim has breads from 2 molds, that even Rabbi Yehuda, that's Gavaldik, will be used in this scenario to say, aha, this is the one that's halachically assumed to be the manpoil. Now, that is only good if 8 of them are selling one mold, and one of them is selling from 2 molds. So that's how I determine who is the palter and who is the manpoil. But what's going to happen if hushvu kulam lasis tufus echad? If all of the palters or all of the Nachtleimim, let's go, all of the Nachtleimim themselves only use the same mold, which means that when you buy it in the market through the paltet or through the manpoil, they all have breads that are all look alike. You know that at least you can go to the minimum because it's a Rabbanan, so we're going to be lenient. But you don't have how to determine which one of the 9 is the manpoil. You don't know that. If you cannot determine it, if there isn't any, let's say, circumstantial evidence, so now maaser mikol kikar v'kikar, even though it's a Rabbanan. But since you don't know who is who, you have no option. You have to treat each paltet as a manpoil. And let me go further. Even though by the and even though every bread looks alike, so what? In this city, all of the breakers sell bread that look alike. By the way, today in bakeries, many, they look alike. Go buy a sourdough round bread. I don't know. To me, they all look alike. So every single bread has to be tied by itself. Okay. So now,
but they have names on them. It says Rabbi Bakery nowadays, so you know where it came from.
Correct. And that's of great significance, as we'll see in a moment. Very good, Kate. So at Khan, this is Gavaldik. You had nine palters and you had 10 bakers. They're using the name palter. One of them is a manpoil. If one of them has different forms, and every baker in the city has different forms, even when Rabbi Yehuda, that's a raya, we know who is who. And if not, we have the doubt. It's called kavua. We don't even need that. We don't know who is who. We don't know to begin with who is who, and therefore we have to be machmir, even though it's a Rabban. Now, what happens if it's the opposite? Not 9 palters and 10 bakers, guys. It's 10 palters and 9 bakers. Okay. Just like you just said above, by the 9 palters and the 10 bakers, that we have the right to say lakula, that 8 buy from 8. Like we mentioned, if you have 10 bakers in the city, they're in business because palters are buying from them. We get to say the minimum possible lakula. So 8 buy from 8. 8 are palters. It's only chad. There's only one of the 9 palters in the case above where the min today. And again, we can use circumstantial evidence when shayach to determine who is the manpoil, allowing everyone else to remain a palter, allowing Rabbi Yehuda's leniency to stand. Now he's really asking. He's not making a statement that it is dissimilar. Is it the same? That's his kasha. We'll see. It's a taker. It's a question that the Gemara doesn't have an answer to. It's a boy the Gemara has no answer to. What happens in the reverse? That you have 9 nachleimim and you have 10 palters. Guys, what does that mean? That means that
they're selling to multiple retailers.
Very good.
The bakers are supplying multiple locations.
Yeah, but that's a problem. Same problem. Because now a palter, also a palter, 2 palters have it from the same one. It's still not a problem. What's the second? So we say that tumnayim in tumnayim, guys, you have to know there's so many different gersois. That 8 buy from 8. And therefore, whoever buys 8 buy from 8, and like Danny said, very good. One baker is selling to 2 palters, but every palter still buys from his source. In other words, no palter is buying his product from more than 1 baker. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda, you remain with the leniency that me'echad ala koil. Do we say that? Tumnaya min tumnaya and utrei min dechad. You see, you have to change it. Utrei min dechad, or oidilma tisha min de tisha. Each one buys from 1 baker. Each one buys from one baker. They had these relationships, and one of the 10 palters, he buys from everyone. Again, a manpoil. If we link a palter and a baker, okay, so what are we going to do? You have 9 palters. You have 9 bakers. So they're linked. You have 10 palters. Yeah, one palter buys a little bit the leftover from every single one. So now we're back with the issue that we had before. If they all have the same molds, you don't know who is who, then again we would say that no matter from which one you buy, you have to be ma'aser mikol echad v'echad. So ma'aser mikol kikar v'kikar, that's the question. Do you do so? Because we don't have how to determine who is who. But here, who says you have to say that? You can argue that no, that every palter, he's calling himself a palter, he sticks to one baker. You have over here 10 bakers. Yeah, one baker is selling consistently to 2 palters, but every palter only has one baker, and that's a kasha. That's a boya that's not answered. Look inside the Rashi Ilio on the right column, 4 lines from the top. Right, that the miboyele, the kasha is ki heichad al Rabbi Yehuda, ki sheyesh lachush hainu heichad al karchach chad palters of min trei nachtoimim, which is what we had before in the above case. When you have 9 palters and 10 bakers, in that case, choishish lekulu. Unless with the molds, if you don't have the molds as an ayah, choishish lekulu. So we have that already concept. We don't say, since it's only damai, we can be making. No, when you don't know how to determine, even that Rabbi Yehuda choishish. So hachimai, kishiyesh yud palterin, the leka el test nachtemim. Mi amrina and tamnayim shakli ushnei palterin shakli michad nachtem, like we mentioned. And you still palted. Every palted only has one supplier. But like a lemechash, lechavish or lekechman palted, shem lekechman hashnayim. The other Rabbi yesh v'ish nei palterin mikabel menach. All you have is you have 2 palterin that buy from one baker. Theoretically, if you would know who they are, you buy one bread from one palter and one bread from the other palter. You can still be ma'aser me'echad al hakoil. Oy neima, no. Dilma, tes palterin. Every palter has one nachton. So you put together 9 and 9. You have 10 palters. 10 palters buys the leftover from the bread that he buys from every single nachton. In other words, maybe it's a manpoil. So maybe. So not svek. Because even in the case before, when you know there's one manpoil, you don't know who the manpoil is. We're being machmir. Let's use, I'm just kol kavua. Maybe. I'm hesitating because I don't know if we say kol kavua on the Rabbanan. But over here, it's really a sveka. Because you don't even know whether for sure there's one manpoil. And even if there is one manpoil, who says you bought it from the manpoil? You don't have that. And that's why this Rashi Ilio says that even though v'salka b'teiku, the Gemara doesn't have an answer. Nevertheless, ulakula says that why? Because the midrabanan, the sfeika the rabbanan ulakula. And I know we mentioned that we don't use sfeika by damai. Here it's different. Here it's many sfeikas. You don't even know whether there's a manpoil. And even if there is a manpoil, who says you bought it from the manpoil? So the Gemara doesn't know whether we have that chashash. Why do we paskin like, says that Rashi Ilio, that you are still able, Rabbi Yehuda, to go to every baker and what you bought from that baker. Today, me'echad al hakoil. You're right.
Rabbi, in this town, before you go to the baker, you have to figure out all these different scenarios.
Well, first of all, not bakery, Kaban, palter. And you have to know the din. Yeah, you're living in the city, and that's the discussion before you go shopping. And people are calling themselves palters. Okay. You want to know whether they are halachically palters or not. What we're saying is that unless there is a reason to know otherwise, you can still presume that's the boya. Halachically, we presume, even though you have over here more bakers than palters. It just means that one baker is doing good business. One baker has 2 outlets. All bakers have one outlet. Baker to palter to people. The baker. That's in this case. Okay. And now next mission is still based on the same thing. And here we're going to move beyond just bread. We're going now beyond just bread. Says the Mishnah. Halakech min ha'ani. We're speaking about the ani is the am ha'aretz. The ani is going, like Marav Fulda says, that halakech min ani ha'machzed al apsachim. He's food raising. Every house gives him a loaf. Most houses are ami ha'aretz. Every am ha'aretz could have another source of bread. You could not be toidim or ma'aseh from one on the other. So if and aniyim, like I said, bread has a shelf life. So when aniyim went asking for money, for food, for whatever, at the end of the day, if they have more bread than they need, they will sell it. It was not uncommon. So if I am buying bread from that ani, I have to take that every bread came from a different balabas. It could be one household gave him 2 loaves, but it could be that every household only gave him 1 loaf. You understand? He's like the manpoil. He has different sources. Or what happens if the ani himself was a chaver? Same thing. So he collected bread. The balabatim that he collected it from, his donors are amei haaretz. Before the ani is going to eat dinner that night, he has to separate the demai separations. He can't take everything from the basket, right? Even if they have the same mold, even if it's all hot, even if it's all cold, all that. No, the cheno ani, that what? Now we're going into more details. Here, it's not just about loaves of bread, which is what you buy from a baker, from a palter, from a manpoil. Here, you're getting your fundraiser, right? So beggars can be picky, right? Sometimes a guy gives you $1. Sometimes a guy gives you wanted $18,000. He gave you $1. You take what you could. The guy gave him a piece of bread. So he shenitin like perusais, pieces of bread, or pilchei devela. Now, guys, pressed figs is not dried figs. Don't confuse that. The pressed figs is that when they would dry the figs, they would then press them into a cake. So there would be whole cakes, and then there would be a chunk. A pilcha means a chunk of the pressed figs.
Like almost a cake.
Almost a cake or a 1% of the cake. The point is that you cannot now join these pressed figs one with the other. Each one came from another source. So whether you are the ani who's a chaver, whether we're speaking about the ani even an amaretz, but the ani is the one that sold it, and the buyer now is a chaver, because you have to presume that every piece of bread, every whole bread, even a chunk, or even every whole, we'll see the chunk in a moment why we're saying that. The ani has it from different suppliers. He has it from different donors. And the donors are ami ha'aretz, and you cannot be toinim ma'aseh from one ami ha'aretz on the other. However, the chiddush of the Mishnah is that if what the ani got was dates come individualized, that's tamarim, or if the ani received grois, which are dried figs, not pressed figs, so he has individuals. Let's say every balabas guys only gave him 1 date. That's the fear. So the Uven, the Amaretz gave him 1 date. Shimon, the Amaretz gave him another date. It means he has many dates, but they came all from each one. Which means theoretically, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to take the Tumas Meiser off each one separately. Now, people didn't preserve, they didn't keep dates or figs individualized. They would make it into this pressed cake. Now the ani went ahead and he mixed them up. He blended them up, belila. If we say halachically, if we say that when you blend something, even dry, yavish, not liquid for sure, that your blending affects a perfect, halachically perfect intermingling, now you could separate the tumas meiser on your intermingled, you ani's intermingled pressed figs. Why? Because even though every fig needed to have its demai separated from it, okay, but proportionally, if my intermingling was done uniformly, so when I'll take off the 1%, I'll argue that it's proportionate. Each single date, each single fig has its representative 1% in my separation.
What's the difference between taking off individually versus collectively?
If I receive pressed figs, it's already a chunk, and I receive from another source another chunk of pressed figs. There, they don't intermingle perfectly.
Yeah, but you still have
It's like Kevin was saying by bread. I know, but there you have to do from one on. Everyone has to have its own. That's what he was asking by bread. But when you receive individual pieces and you mix them up, our Mishnah holds that you could be boilel and vinoitel. Huge. Because we're saying that you intermingled it so perfectly that now that you made the press, every part has from all of it equally. You can make what we would think can only happen by a liquid, you can do by a solid. That's right. Or you did de facto, once you received it, people did not preserve individualized dates. They don't last long. They would press them and they would diss them. So you did it. Now doesn't matter. And it's mashma, not if you did it. You could lechatchila blend it. Boilo v'noitel. That's a big statement.
The bread it's not possible.
Bread it's not possible. Very good. Bread it's not possible. And even pressed figs it's not possible. Even if you mixed it. Because we're going to say you mixed it, but it wasn't the perfect mixture. Maybe when you took off, in what you took off, you don't have an equal representation.
Because you can see this is from here, that's from there.
Very good. And here, it's very little. And when you mingle them, our Tana hold, yesh belila, which means that you can make, even by yavesh, in this case, a perfect intermingling. However, let's go. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, and the way we will see it clear, Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with the Tana Kama. Rabbi Yehuda is explaining and qualifying the Tana Kama. And this we will read the words and we'll explain it the next year because it's late. Amosai, when could you say? When do we say that boilel v'noitel? That's only bisman shematana meruba. That's when the donors gave to the ani from whom you bought a large amount. But if the ani got from every donor a small amount, we're speaking dafka again about the dates and the individualized dried figs, then you don't mingle it. And if you mingled it, you're all messed up now. And we're going to explain this in the Gemara. I want to finish the Mishnah. And the final case in them is 7:00. And David is davening Shachris, and here we go. He needs time. So the halakech and asitoin. We already said the sitain in the intro. Sitain is a wholesaler. Both the wholesaler dafka buys from many suppliers, and the ikid is that the sitain does not sell it in the market. He's not the palter. And by the way, a sitain is not only for bread. Someone that's what we know in business. You're sitting over here. You go to China and you buy from many suppliers, or you buy only America and you buy from many suppliers, and you sell it to retailers. You have many suppliers and you have many outlets. Thank God. So let's go. I buy something from a sitain today, and I buy something from a sitain at another time, not at the same time. Since the sitain has many suppliers, so when do I say what I bought now came from another supplier? So if you buy from a sitain, you buy it on the second time before you tied the first produce. And now that you have two separate purchases, can I, the buyer, now combine them and be ma'aser? Lo ya'aser mizel zeh. Even if ma'oisa hasug, we're going to see in the Gemara, sug means even though both purchases came from the same container. And even it's ma'oisa haminats of the same variety. So you have circumstantial evidence that it's all the same. We don't say that. By the way, that does mean that when I make one purchase, if it's from the same container and it's the same variety, even one purchase, you can argue, maybe the one purchase came from two different sources. That we don't say. The problem is only if you make two separate purchases. However, that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, that Am Ha'aretz is only not trustworthy if he's going to testify regarding Trumas U'Maisis, because since he's not scrupulous, we don't believe him. But otherwise, we believe him. So what happens if I'm making two purchases from the wholesaler, but I'm asking him, when I made a purchase 2 hours ago or 2 days ago, what I'm buying now, is it from the same? If he says it's from the same, we believe him. That Neban Hasit and Loim Mishal Echadein. Beautiful.
So he's different than the manpo.
He's not different than the manpo. No one ever spoke about if you can ask the manpo. The manpo would not even remember. Wholesaler would remember. Look, that's what I think. Because you can't ask him, did you separate kites? First of all, he doesn't even do that because we already learned before that anyone that sells wholesale lechatchila doesn't have to tithe. Because that's a rule. Mida gas, you don't have to tithe. So I have to tithe. So that's the rule of our Mishnah. When you buy from a sitoin, every purchase has to be tithe by itself. But if I bought a purchase number 2, and it's coming from the same container, and it's coming from the same variety, and I ask the sitoin, and when he sells it to me, he tells me, yeah, it's from the same batch. Now I could be ma'asir me'echad al